Hello writers, I want to share with you a couple of things that have really resonated with me or impressed me since I was down in Nottingham yesterday to host a first meeting in a series of an event called Shut Up and Write. And I've talked about Shut Up and Write in another video fairly recently. But that was about the idea of prepping for it and getting ready for the event and my thoughts and ideas as we got closer to the event. But yesterday was the day of a 2-hour session called Shut Up and Write, and it was held in Nottingham Central Library, which is an amazing facility. It's a purpose-built library that replaced one that was a little bit tired in the centre of town that had been there for decades and decades. In fact, when I was a teenager, I worked around the corner from the then main library, and it was already starting to become a little bit shabby, and it was in a state of decline back in the 1980s. So the new place that opened last year is a wonderland for bibliophiles, for writers, for fantasy gamers. There was, when I was there on Saturday, there was a group of about 15 folk playing Dungeons and Dragons. They had all the figurines and the creatures that were beautifully painted and decorated, and they were moving those around the boards on the different campaign fields or the different environments that they were playing. And it was great just to see that. But there's a cafe there, there are lots of rooms available for hire, and some people were there to read, others had taken their families to see little exhibitions. Some people were just enjoying the space as a break during time, maybe shopping in Nottingham for the weekend. But we hosted the event. I say we, I mean I was the actual facilitator, but it was put on by a group that I've belonged to for almost 5 years called the Nottingham Writers Studio. Now, the fact that we don't actually meet in our own specific studio, that's part of our history and our heritage. But the ability that we have now to meet in this modern facility for those who love books from all sorts of directions or approaches. Yesterday there were a great range of people. Some had written poetry. Several have been published in the anthology that we create each year for the members of the Writers Studio. By the way, look it up online, Nottingham Writers Studio, and feel free to join, or whether as a member or as a non-member, come to some of our events. There are regular socials, but also writing events, workshops, things like yesterday's facilitated Shut Up and Write process, just to get you in that space where you have no distraction, you let go of your excuses. In fact, you leave your excuses for not writing at the door of the meeting room, and you come in, and we just had a great environment for what my friend Tish Bouvier calls pushing the words forward. I love that phrase. It means so much to me, and it's something that when Tish first shared it with me in a video chat we had a couple of years ago, it stuck in my noggin very straightforwardly and very clearly. There were a range of us there, like I've said. Some are published, some not. I, for example, am a very slow writer. I wrote my first book in 2002. So 23 years later, I'm now about to publish my 10th book. So there's me as an example of a traditionally published and also an indie author situation. There were those there who've been published in our anthologies. One of the participants, she had been working on a memoir. Another was working on a process where she was looking at something that had happened to her in her earlier stage of life and thinking, could this be the basis for a novel? Could this be something that I can adapt and turn into either a fictional story, or should I tell it as it is, as a real life set of experiences, and find value in the cathartic process of letting go of those events and activities, or finding it to be a subject that other people want to talk about and engage with, and in that way finding her audience for that particular book. So there were several of us there, and it was a range of activities. But I wanted to share with you tonight some of the things that came up in conversation. One of those is the huge level of self-doubt. I go through it, and I'm with a few books behind me and a few books that are in my portfolio of work that's been written. Others are there with the fear that to get from where they are now to where they would like to be with first a finished draft manuscript, then a second or a third draft and more, then getting the process printed and shared with somebody, and actually then seeing your work finished and ready to offer to an audience. So we had a big range of experiences, understandings, perspectives on what we can do or where we can go with our writing. And a common denominator that came out of the conversations, and one lady summed it up very well. She said, I've thought about writing almost every day for most of my adult life. But today I'm giving myself in this workshop 2 hours to sit down and just commit to some of my ideas and see what I might be able to do in 2 hours without distraction. And I was deeply touched by that, because we, I think, all go through that process of saying to ourselves, I am going to write, I'm going to grab a pen and a notebook, and I'm going to start putting my ideas down. But whether we get anywhere with that is not so much the luck of the draw, but it's a function of the decisions we make and the events we have in our diaries and the distractions and what other people need from us in day-to-day life and our work pressures, all sorts of things. And I covered fairly repeatedly, but in different formats, the idea that to become an author from the stage of being first a writer, you have to finish the manuscript, then you have to publish the manuscript. So we are all writers, whether I'm using pen and paper or I'm using my Alpha Smart, which I'm so fond of. And I took this down and showed a few people because they hadn't seen one before. Whether I'm using a laptop, whether you've got a desktop device that you write with happily, or whether you are a journaler and you will work your ideas out in ink through spiral bound notebooks or A5 Moleskine type notebooks. It doesn't matter. That's what makes all of us writers. That is what makes all of us writers in the first place. And we reach that common ground of taking the ideas from here and thinking through the ink. We think through the ink to get those ideas into something that can be printed or shared or finished as a draft before we put it out there in the world. And the message I was sharing was, first we finish, and that's part of the process from moving from writer to author. And my role yesterday as facilitator was simply to set up the room and have a few refreshments ready, and I had some writing craft books for sale, and everything was ready for us all just to get on with the process. But my role was to say, right, we're going to write for 10 minutes and then we're going to write for 20 minutes. And there was no discussion in the blocks of writing time. We could each speak and share as participants within the room between each session. But the rule was, I say, shut up and write. And we all started writing. So I hosted it for 10 minutes, then 20 minutes, and then 30 minutes. So we'd been writing for an hour by that stage, and we had a little 10-minute break, and then came back into the room and reversed the process. So we wrote for another 30 minutes, then 20, and then we wrapped up with a final 10-minute writing session before we just stopped and shared what had happened, where ideas had led us over the course of those little 6 blocks of time, before we could then think, okay, I will commit to being here next month, and this is what I'm thinking of doing in the interim. So it was a very productive session, as much for me as it was for the participants, because it allowed us all to take those ideas, like I've said, maybe I wrote mine on here, but to take those ideas and to write quickly, to write without distraction, and to focus on those things which are important to us as creative people, which is capturing words on screen or on paper. That's hilarious. I just spoke to the camera for 8 minutes and then suddenly realised that I'd finished and went to switch off the recording option. And of course, I hadn't even pressed record 8 minutes previously. So here we are again, or at least I am, turning up to go through the process of what I think is important. What I had actually just said to camera is that there are 3 things which you really need to focus on in order to get this right, in order to bring to fruition your story or your poems or the things that are important to you in your writing work. It applies to any creative endeavour, but today we're talking about the idea of shut up and write and using that as your way forward, your key to unlock the door to all the benefits that will come from having your work in print or in digital format. So I've talked about consistent action. Without consistent action, nothing happens. One of the things that I will always do every week on a Tuesday and a Thursday evening at 5 o'clock, I'm in the library at work and I'll be there with a cup of coffee and I will have 2 hours to myself where my action is about developing a manuscript. It might be, as it was yesterday on the train on the way down to Nottingham, I'm writing some ideas about where I think my characters have gone so far with the story. At other times, I'm actually just letting the pen out on paper and allowing it to tell me where the story is going. So I'm writing creatively in those 2 hours. The other thing is that this is the second one, there are no excuses. It's easy to say, oh, I'll do this, but I've got babysitting, or I'll do this, but I need to head out to the shops. I'd like to do some writing tonight, but I know that I've been offered some overtime and I need to take the overtime. Take the overtime and get up earlier the next day, or take the overtime, get a few hours sleep, wait till the house is quiet and everybody's gone to sleep, and then set your alarm to be up in the middle of the evening for a couple of hours to get that work done. Do you know, if I'd asked everybody in that room yesterday, are you busy? What would our answers have been? All of us would have said, yes, I'm supremely busy. I never have enough time in the day. That's all of us. That's a human condition. We're always busy. So you have to prioritize your writing, make it happen and make it important to you so that you can get the work done. So first thing, consistent action. Second one, no excuses. And my final point, my third point here as part of this, just shut up and write, get the work done, is commit to yourself only. That's my third point here. Your neighbours are never going to pay your bills. Your workmates are not remotely interested in whether you publish something or not. And if you do, they're never going to buy it. I've got 9 books out. My family have never bought a single one of my books. I gifted them to my parents and they read them and were very proud of me. That's great. Nobody else has. But it doesn't matter because they're not my audience. Your family are not your audience. If you want to sell 1,000 or 10,000 copies of your published piece of work, you need to have an extended family to make that worthwhile. It's not going to happen that way. So there we have it. That's what I wanted to share with you after the brilliant time I had with other fellow members of the writing studio yesterday in Nottingham. Those 3 things will help you, I believe, to move from regular writing to actually being published, to having your work in the public domain, either in digital or print format or both. And those are the 3 things. First one is consistent action. The second is no excuses. And the third is commit to yourself only. Nobody else has control over your diary. Nobody else has your ability to use pen or keyboard to get your work done and to find yourself having expressed yourself in those mediums. This is about you. This is about you getting the words out of here and onto that other medium, the paper or the digital format, and nobody else is going to do it for you. This is a little bit of a tough love story, but that's what works. That's what's going to happen with the discipline that you bring to this process. This is the only way that you're going to get your writing goals come to fruition, by doing the work. So shut up and write. We know you can, and you know you have the ability So let us know how you get on. Make that move from writer to author, from working on a project to finishing a project. Watch the clock, see what you do, and tell us the outcome. Shut up and write.